Hey Siri, what happened at WWDC for Tech Republic and ZDNet? I'm Dan Patterson with Larry Dignan and Jason Hiner. Of course, I'm talking about Memojis. Larry, there are a ton of actual productivity features announced at WWDC. Siri updates was a big one. What's Apple doing with its AI platform?
Well, they kind of pivoted the whole conversation around Siri from how dumb she is to actually how you can program it to do workflow things, right? So they rolled out this thing called shortcuts, and what it does is you can basically tell Siri like workflow kind of things. You can tell it like schedule me appointments, those type of things, and it actually looks sort of handy. But the key thing to note there is that Siri is basically tapping into apps, and it's tapping into libraries, and it's tapping into the user themselves who can set up these shortcuts. So basically, Apple is taking Siri and kind of crowdsourcing her brain a bit, so she's a little smarter. Well, he maybe, I don't, depending on the voice you choose.
You can choose whichever one.
Most of us go default. I disabled Siri, so I'm kind of done with that whole thing.
I made it British, so at least it sounds smarter.
Yeah, I was so done with Siri this morning. But anyway. So they've basically changed this into more of a workflow tool, which really takes it away from that Google Assistant comparison and the Amazon Alexa comparison, which both of those two are looking smarter than Siri at the moment. So by doing that, they sort of turned the whole conversation away and maybe actually made Siri useful.
I mean, Siri, the big problem they have is they're so far behind in the AI race, right? It's just not a core competency of theirs. They've hired a bunch of people, but not nearly as many as Facebook, Amazon, Google, and they're just playing from behind in a big way. So to play to their strengths, they're like, they bought the Workflow app a few years ago, and they're taking that and saying like, okay, now you can connect different apps that you have together so that you can do some smart things, you know, with your schedule, with reminders, with some of the things that can help save you some steps instead of having to, you know, pound away at your phone on apps and you know, do everything manually. They're trying to save you some steps by connecting some apps together using Workflow, which is probably a pretty smart thing for them to play to their strengths.
It's their best move.
It's the best move they've got, you know, until they get or buy an AI company, until they get smarter with AI. But they're also, remember, they're also playing this to their strength in terms of using it as a way to say, well, we're going to protect your privacy better than some of those other ones because you know, AI relies on data and using all that data about you. And Apple's like, no, we're not going to use all that data about you because, you know, we're going to protect your privacy. When really they can't do that very well because they don't have the AI smarts, you know, the AI chops to do it. So, you know, kudos to them on playing their strengths. We'll see if it actually works as well as Google Now and Alexa, which are working pretty well.
It's a nice sleight of hand.
Yeah.
You know, I love this chaining of, instead of peripheral awareness of data, which Google Now uses to send you those little card updates, chaining it to one of my all-time old favorite apps, Workflow, which on iOS worked a lot like Automator. I think will be an actually useful form of, if not quite machine learning, of Siri and the virtual assistant. So they made some other good use of automated actions, and one of those was with FaceTime and group calling, which you can do directly from iMessage, which they mentioned is end-to-end encrypted a number of times. Jason, will this group calling feature be something that businesses actually use?
I think small businesses, yeah. If you don't want to pay for Zoom, you don't want to pay for another service, you know, Google Hangouts, they've really let that thing kind of dry on the vine a little bit. They've kind of relaunched it recently, you know, rebranded, relaunched a little bit, but clearly they haven't put a lot of energy into it. It doesn't work very well. So it is ripe for a some low-hanging fruit there where, you know, Apple can let a lot of people who use iPhones, especially in the US, where a lot of business users use iPhones. Small business startups, I could see them using this for their video calling feature, yeah.
Yeah, this follows the Apple playbook, which is you come out with a halfway decent, slightly cool feature, and then you bring it to work, right? So instead of going through procurement and doing your Zoom calls or WebEx or something, if it's something where you don't need screen sharing and chat and all the other bells and whistles, FaceTime might be fine. It can support up to 32 people, which sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it could be a selling point. But yeah, make no mistake. I mean, Group FaceTime is really about consumers. You know, one example is you can hook up your Memoji, which basically takes that Samsung feature and does it right, because the Samsung, whatever Samsung had going on, it was a disaster.
It bombed, yeah.
So, you know, it's basically your avatar / animation thing, and you could have a meeting that way, which, I don't know, could be kind of cool once in a while.
It even senses when you stick out your tongue.
Right.
So that's probably the #1 story out of WWDC, you know, animated tongues and emojis, Memojis.
So our next one-on-one, Dan, is all about the Memoji.
And encrypted tongues. So speaking of encryption, they did mention privacy a number of times. We've talked at length about Apple and privacy in terms of branding. Were there any big updates, or is this kind of more the same, Apple positioning themselves as the anti-data company?
I think they talked to it a bit, but they didn't focus on it too much. I think it's a case of, it's more subtle, like how they position their data play. Like they always talk about the device, they talk about encryption, but it's all between the commas. It's not something they talk about and chest thump about, right? Like they'll talk about, you know, like, I mean, you could even look at their thing with phone addiction, saying, you know, certain apps that notify you too much or collect data, you can set limits on, right? Which is, you know, referring to Facebook basically. So you can see how they do it, but they do it subtly, because I don't think privacy by itself is much of a marketing win.
All right. There were a ton of big updates from WWDC. We have all of them on ZDNet and Tech Republic. You can also download PDFs and ebooks with greater analysis of the trends that are emerging at WWDC. And while you're on Tech Republic, don't forget to subscribe to our Story of the Day newsletter and the Tech Today newsletter on ZDNet.